Hello, everyone. This is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroyev. Thank you for coming to my webinar. Today, we are going to talk about material sacrifices, especially pawn sacrifices for defensive purposes. So, for example, when we are in a trouble, one of the solutions in order to activate our pieces can be pawn sacrifice for some initiative. So this is what we are going to talk about. Okay, before we continue with the main topic, let's check your homework. And actually, I decided to change the format of our webinars. I think that doing simuls after the main part of the webinar is too time consuming. And usually half of participants leave the meeting after we do the main part. So that's why I decided to not conduct simuls. But if you want to get simuls back, let me know. Okay, so the video and audio quality I think is good. So let's start. The webinar is recorded. It's also streaming on YouTube at the ChessLand's website too. And let's start. So your homework was, first homework was this position. If you remember, last time we were talking about a sacrifice on G7. So Garry Kasparov in this position was playing against Ledger Sportish and played D5. So here probably knight takes C4 was a better option, but then queen E4, G6. So, well, it's possible to take it, but white doesn't win a piece. There is a queen also, and queen E5. Threatening a checkmate. However, f6, queen e6, and the white's position seems to be a little better, but not completely winning. In the game, it was e takes d5, which was already a mistake. What then? So c takes d5 and bishop d5. It's time for sacrifices now. So what do you think? Which move to play first? What are your candidates? So bishop g7, bishop h7, or maybe anything else. Bishop h7, that's the central bishop. Okay, so bishop h7 was what Garry Kasparov played. It wasn't the best move, but it was a possible solution. Well, bishop takes g7 right now doesn't make much sense because you cannot continue the attack right away. Also, I think they can capture there, maybe. So bishop g7, king g7, knight d4, rook g8, and they try to evacuate the king to f8. But if you start with knight d4 without any sacrifices, threatening with this move, how do they have to play? Well, definitely not bishop f6, because if bishop f6, you just play queen h5 and do a double attack and win a piece. So g6. But g6, still knight f5, and after, well, you're threatening with a checkmate to take the bishop, so it's almost over if they do not accept. If, for example, this, then bishop e5, taking the queen, and what's then? So the queen moves. Queen moves, so let's say to c6 or anywhere, knight h6, king f8, and just bishop b5, for example. Maybe the queen moves somewhere else. Let's say the queen moves there. Still knight h6, king f8, and in order to deliver a checkmate, queen b2. So it's a deadly attack, and white didn't sacrifice any material, just one pawn on d5. So that's why they have to take, actually. Then bishop takes, and there is no defense against queen h5 or queen g4 and then queen h5. Well, I don't even know how to defend. Maybe queen f4 works. If queen f4 works, then just queen rook d5 is fine, I think, and then queen h5. No. Okay. So knight d4 was the best move in this position. Garry played this, which is still fine. then rook d5, king goes to the safe place, and that was the moment for the sacrifice on g7. So this is where he sacrifices. Well, he could also play something else, but if he does, let's say, this move to threaten some attack, then queen c2, and this move is very annoying because it controls the squares, so it's hard to invade the enemy camp. Now, for example, queen e7, queen b2, and then how to continue? This, rook c1, g4, and escape square for the king. Well, and it's a little risky for white. Doing queen e4 in this position instead, well, interesting, but still queen c2. So yeah, rook h5 doesn't work. So bishop g7 instead, that was a winning idea. Bishop g7. So if the king doesn't take, it's just a deadly attack. The king takes and knight e5. Now the queen is able to join the attack. So queen g4, king f8, queen f5 threatening the mate as well. This fork, f6, and knight d7. So what happens here? If this move, it's a checkmate in one. If king f7, I think it's also a checkmate. This, he goes there, rook e1, even sacrificing on d5, after which we can play this move, and then checkmate with queen e6. Yeah, queen e6. Well, also rook d1 is a checkmate. So that's why they have to take, after which white takes on d7, making a kind of a fork. So queen goes to c5, and this it's almost over. So check, king f7, and here just rook d3. Well, actually, this is already a winning position. Why? It's a rook for two minor pieces. But look at this king, how weak it is. And with the queens on the board, the attack is likely to become decisive. So knight c4, rook fd1, a few more checks, and soon black had to resign. So king f5, because doing this move doesn't make much sense. The king is chased away from the knight, so instead the king should go there, and then g4. So if they take, it's also game over after this move because they lose a knight. Maybe there is anything better. Well, maybe rook d5 is better. Okay, so king f4, rook d4, he goes there, and finally after queen b3, they have to resign, and actually black did resign. Why? Well, this is the move, right? So many of you may consider this, which also provides you with a winning position. Maybe this is better. Like that. Yes, it's absolutely winning, but let me show you. So this. So it's absolutely winning. But instead, you just can play this. King e2 and queen e4. Now they have to sacrifice the queen, and it's still a checkmate. So Gary sacrificed on g7 here in order to make the king more vulnerable because the white pieces are already active and can join the attack quickly, but the king is left without defenders. Homework number 2. So here definitely the move is this. King takes b7. So what is your suggestion here? So I've got an email from Johnny who suggested the solution, but nobody else sent anything. So what do you think, guys? How to play for white in this position? It's definitely a move with a check. But which? So we have rook b1, maybe queen b3. We have two moves with a knight, so knight 4 and knight 6 to c5. Okay, so rook b1 with a suggestion. Brian suggests knight ec5. Brian, actually, both knights are e knights. So you can say the sixth knight or the fourth knight to c5. Okay, knight e4. Okay, yeah. So rook b1 just allows them to play knight b6. Instead, this knight. Why? Because if the king goes there, now you have a winning idea with this move, queen e4. You need to vacate this square. So c6, queen takes, and this is a checkmate. Well, if you play with this knight, then after king a8, you can just take the rook and you are not fully winning. So, well, yeah, this is a favorable position for white anyway, and you are threatening with this, but this time they have several ways of how to defend the position. At least queen d5, queen b6, queen a6. So I don't know what is better. Well, so this knight goes. If they take, you take. Oh yeah, queen e1 is a mate. Thanks. Yeah, exactly. Queen e1 is a mate. So that is a mistake. Yeah, so this knight goes. Now what? Well, they take, you take. Now if the king goes to c6, you at least have knight b3 and win the queen. If the king goes to b6, well, if the king goes there, it's still queen e4 with a checkmate on b7 or yeah, on with knight d7 as we did before. Now these two moves. In both cases, you can, well, here you continue with this move and then knight d7, or if the king goes there, it's still knight b3 winning the queen. If the queen blocks, you take there first and then you take there. So king b8, knight d7, king b7. If king e8, it's a checkmate in one. So king b7. Okay, now how to play. It seems that we are still down a pawn. If you decide to play queen e4, which does make sense, then just c6. And don't forget your rook is hanging with a checkmate. Well, rook b1 with a tempo, then this. Knight b6. Knight c5 again, but what's the purpose? King goes there. So the move you need to play here is this, which threatens with queen c6. Because how to defend? How to defend the c6? This move, then it's a fork. Queen a6, it's also a fork. Queen b5, it's a pin. So, and after queen c6 is coming, well, let's say knight d6, because knight b6 is a terrible move. You can take on c7. So knight d6, for example, then queen c6 anyway, and where the king goes. If the king goes to c8, you can win a rook for a knight. So a6 maybe, queen c6, king a7. At the very least, you can capture and exchange, because then the king has to stay on the edge of the board, and it's hard to defend. At least you can take there and maybe one of these two pawns. So h5, maybe knight h5 works. If rook h5, you can take there. So it's completely winning. Okay, that was the solution. So you take on b7 first, and then this knight goes to c5 with a winning attack, which your task was to calculate. Let's continue with our main topic. our main topic today is a material sacrifice in defensive purposes. What does it mean? So imagine a situation when you are in a trouble, so you think your position is losing, however, your opponent has only a positional advantage. Material is even. Very often, it does make sense to sacrifice some material to get relief. You can sacrifice material for several purposes. For example, you can activate your pieces. You can exchange uh, the enemy piece, which is dangerous. You can just reduce the amount of material, or you can turn enemy pieces off the place of action. Sometimes you can even sacrifice minor, major pieces in order to make a fortress or in order to get stalemate. But even a fortress against the queen. So, but this is what I included in the homework for today's webinar. I'm going to send it to you later. Uh, However, we are going to analyze cases where the pawn is sacrificed. So, um, let's start. And what I want you to learn that always think about such a trick or such a method of defending your position, like a pawn sacrifice, when you think that you are in a positional grip and you need to get your pieces better. Just a pawn sacrifice may provide you with chances. Well, when I think about my own experience, one game comes to my mind. The game that I recently played in the National League here in Argentina, I drew where I was playing without a pawn, but I didn't sacrifice the pawn, I lost it. I lost a pawn, but then I found a way of how to get my pieces activated because the enemy, because the queens were exchanged. So we are 15 minutes late. You are only 15 minutes late. We did the homework of the previous webinar, and now we start our main topic for today, the um, so material sacrifices in defensive purposes. This is the first game. So, well, black definitely has a very tough position. Well, a lot of weaknesses. So e6, c6. All pieces are passive. G6 is also a weakness, actually. There is also a pin. So the pieces are passive. They only do defensive functions. Well, maybe this rook does some attacking option. I mean, attacking action, but the rest of the pieces are really bad. And um, here black always have to keep an eye on the seventh rank, because if rook d7 coming, it can pin the king and the queen together. So Brian suggests to play f5 in this position. Let's take a look at this move. Well, what can we say? So can they, well, f5 makes sense because otherwise white plays f5. Well, f5 they can capture on c6 and win a pawn and then start advancing their other pawns. So looks like it doesn't really help. If you, for example, defend on c6, well, we cannot do knight d7, I think, just this move. And the knight is under attack. Where does it go? Okay, f5, this, rook c8, b5. Looks like it still doesn't work. So, for example, knight d7 this time, maybe just rook takes d7, and it looks fine. So, rook bc8, defending on c6. This is definitely a candidate move that I'm sure came to your mind. But then f5. 5, g takes f5, for example, bishop takes f5, and it's really hard to defend against this pin because, well, what they're going to do, they're just increasing pressure and finally taking on the 6, like this, and this. because the rooks are unable to defend the 6, and because of that, I don't think they can survive. Also, there is a chance to regroup pieces and attack from that side, but every time the queen moves, the bishop becomes hanging. So white has to keep an eye on it, but well, they just need to play this move and capture on the 6. That's it. Or they can let me just play a random move. They can even do like that and then take, threatening with some discovered attacks as well as attacking the queen. So it seems to be a disaster after f5. That's why such a move doesn't work. And that's why Mikhail Chigorin, who was playing this position with black pieces, decides to sacrifice this pawn. Instead, he plays, instead of defending, he plays this attacking move, attacking before. Okay, this defending before, because this exchange doesn't favor white, because, well, they can play rook d7, but their queen is hanging at the moment. And also there will be some checks. For example, if the queen moves there, well, it's possible to exchange the rooks, and when black exchanges white active pieces, their chances to draw the game becomes much higher. Okay, so rook b1 defending this. What do you think Chigorin had in mind when he decided to double the rooks and force the enemy rook to go to the b file to defend b4? Now the key move, because of which he played rook cb7. Knight d7, no, it's, well, knight d7, then it's still bishop c6. He played this move in order to exchange the rooks. So bishop c6 fails, right? Because this, and black wins a pawn back, and also their pieces now become better. The knight can go there. That's why rook takes c6. But now this rook becomes more active. Rook b d8, and black dominates on the d file. Well, it's still winning position for white if they play properly, but this time black has a counterplay. Rook b6 to start advancing the pawns, then f5, bishop moves, and rook d4. Well, in fact, black didn't achieve much at the moment. So there are two passed pawns, the b and the c, and the king is still in danger. But white has to play accurately. So queen a6. Now the attack continues with queen h4, and black tries to overtake initiative. So, well, this move wouldn't work. Rook b7, and if you do this, it's c6, creating a passed pawn. If you instead do this, well, it's still c6, taking advantage of a pin. So that's why queen h4. Check, king goes to g8. So queen a7 doesn't threaten with a checkmate, because after king h8, there is a knight that covers h7 square. That's why the f4 pawn is hanging, and instead of playing queen a7, they have to defend it with g3. Queen goes back to f6 to cover these squares. And then white made a mistake. So your task here is to suggest the best move for white in this position. What do you think? Looks like black activated their pieces, and white is still winning because of these two pawns. The pawns must march with c6, but if you do c6, it's rook d3. So queen d4 is coming. So for example, bishop g2, it's a check, and maybe even a perpetual check. So rook b2 is the next move. Let's say take. I mean queen b2. Then he go there. And if you decide to block, then I go there. So for example, king g2. Let me think how to play. Maybe maybe just this move, because if the king goes there, it's a disaster. It's queen f2, threatening checkmate on h2. And if the king goes there, I still think it's queen f2, threatening checkmate, and I don't see any defense. So you have to play accurately. So c6 doesn't work. Maybe c6, rook d3, c7. It makes more sense, but then I think it's still queen goes to there. Yeah, queen goes there. So king h1. How do we continue? Can we take? Well, no, I doubt. Let's just play this move, and then we are still threatening to take. And if the bishop moves here, there is a check. If the bishop goes there, there is a check here. So, well, no, white is not winning here. So it's not c6. What else you have in mind? b5. Okay, b5 actually is even worse because c6 at least threatens with c7, but b5 doesn't threaten with it. It's still rook d3 and rook d2 and queen d4. Such a move should be queen e1 because queen e1 paralyzes the black pieces. So first it was important for white to prevent this activity. It also covers d1 square. So now rook d1, just rook takes d1. It was a rook blunder. Maybe e5, f takes e5, and in order to get rid of the pin, just queen e6. Because if this, it's rook e1, queen goes back, and queen e2 check. And after the king moves, well, it can be, for example, queen f7. Offering a queen exchange, after which these pawns are, well, I don't want to lose the pawn on b4, so maybe not queen f, maybe just rook f7. Rook f7, queen goes away, and maybe we can just pin it. Yeah, we can pin it. Most likely we provoke this exchange, and after that, it's time to advance the pawns. So this is a winning position, obviously. If they go there, then it's rook b6. So, basically the same idea. c6 and it's over. There is not enough counterplay because once the queens are exchanged, these two connected pass pawns are promoted. So queen e1 was the key move. Instead, it was queen e2 played. Rook comes to d3. Now c6. Queen d4. King goes back, and rook e3 attacking the queen. So that's why they have to move the queen. Now queen c3. It stops. It controls the c pawn as well as attacks f3. So maybe rook c1 could make more sense, but after rook c1, it's this. This, and actually white seems to be better. So rook f d1, let's say, to defend rook c2 to avoid problems, and then c7. Maybe white is still have some winning chances, but instead they retreated with the bishop, which was definitely logical. Rook d2, creating a counterplay, but c7, just one square left to promote. However, rook c2, so we are covering this square twice. Rook d1 to bring the rook there, but it's always a problem because of c1. Rook e2. So if rook b8, I just take there. If queen f3 was played in the game, then I have several options. I think, well, rook e1 works, but rook g2, the move that was played in the game, was the most obvious one. If queen takes queen, it's just a perpetual check. This is where the game ended in a draw. If, let's say, what else? Queen takes there, rook takes this, and queen c6. And now black is even winning because here they can block, bring their knight, blockade the pawns, and bring their king to capture on c7 with the queen successfully, and then it's a winning position. So this is how the game ended. Instead of keeping pieces on their passive positions in order to keep the pawn on c6 alive, black decided to sacrifice it by playing this move and by retreating with this rook to the d file, because after rook takes c6, they could create some initiative through the d file. and through the dark squares because of activating their queen. Oh, well, this is what you should have in mind. So sacrifice pawns in order to activate pieces, because one pawn doesn't guarantee a winning position. Sometimes it may change the course of the game and the position may become winning, but you should have practical chances instead of just passively defend your position. Now let's continue with the next example. So black to move. What do you think about this position? So it seems that white is about to exchange the bishops, and actually I think if bishop takes bishop, it's f takes g5, then knight g4, so h6 and f6 are weak. So what will you play here? So e5 is one of the suggestions. Okay, interesting actually, because I didn't consider it. Oh, well, e5 stops knight g4, because if you play something slow, then knight g4 provokes bishop takes there, because there is no way to defend the bishop. Okay, e5 does make sense. Oh, it blunders knight d5 actually, so it doesn't make sense. Okay, so here John suggests a proper move, h6, right? And actually, white better take on f6, queen f6, queen b2, queen g7, and the game would end. Then the position is approximately equal. It doesn't end in a draw, but it's approximately equal. Oh, black has some initiative because of the open file. Potentially, they can try to make b3 a weakness and attack it with such moves like knight a5, rook a3, and so on. But, well, at the very least, it's possible to take on c6 and avoid it. However, they were too greedy and decided to take on h6, which now turn the bishop off the place of action. A takes b3, a takes b3, and rook goes there. So rook d4, while this bishop is useless. If bishop g5 back, this time knight d4 works with knight e2 threat, and it's not possible to save this pawn. And after the second rank is cleared, white is almost losing. So they played bishop f3 to defend. What would you play in this position? So bishop takes h4 seems to be too risky. So bishop takes h4, g takes, queen takes. Let's say bishop g5. What then? Queen g3. Okay, I can block with my knight at least. And then I'm threatening with this. Well, it's not a serious threat, but it looks like you cannot succeed with this attack. Bishop d4 is a candidate move. This is what was played in the game. Knight d4 deserves attention, but you are not threatening to take at the moment, so they can play bishop g5 and exchange the bishops. That's why you'd better use this bishop first. However, a better move was this, threatening to go there, and then to play this move. So it's definitely a bishop move to not let them to exchange. Yeah, knight d4 is natural, I agree, but after this move, you lose your main advantage, your dark squared bishop that can attack through the weakened dark squares in the enemy camp. Now what? So bishop takes e3. Why this move? Well, to liquidate this knight and now settle the knight on d4, trying to play such moves like knight c2, knight takes b3, and also taking advantage of this diagonal. So because this may become a threat. Every time they take with a piece, it's something like that. Of course, we have to consider e4. That's why it's too early to take on f3, but this is one of the ideas. Bishop g4 was played, bishop c6, king moves. Nothing specific, but f5. They decided to move the bishop there. So now bishop takes. Pawn has to take. This knight is several times better than this bishop, and this bishop is out of the place of action almost for the end of the game. Because how to get this bishop involved? With bishop g7, but the king takes. With this move, but the queen just moves. We can go rook e2, but queen c1, so it doesn't trap. We may consider this move for some future ideas, but rook e2 right now doesn't improve our position. We can play this move, then rook e2 to gain a temper and to get the second rook to the second rank. That makes sense. But f5 was a very nice idea. It stops the f pawn, and now the bishop cannot get to the game. And this knight is 100 times stronger than the bishop. So rook e2 was actually played, queen c1, and instead of doing rook a8 move, which would face with this, because knight b3 cannot be played, then this rook is hanging. They played queen b7, attacking there and preparing rook a8. Rook b2. Rook a8, so the rook is poisoned. King h7 doesn't trap the bishop because the bishop escapes to g5. So you can play this move in order to attack it, but what's the purpose? You spend the tempo and maybe make his bishop a little better, because if now the bishop escapes to f6, it can capture the knight. You'd better wait until he plays this move and then play king f7 to stop bishop f6. King h1, and how would you play in this position? Here it's already time for a tactical solution, I would say. Okay, I see the point, but I still don't understand the purpose of bishop king h7, because the bishop on g5 is better than the bishop on h6. So knight f3 is one of the suggestions. Okay, knight f3, rook takes z2. Are you okay with this? I don't think so. So knight f3 doesn't work. Okay. So yes, you can go knight h4 and create a discovered attack, but I'm completely fine with it. Where do I move the king? Let's say to g1. What then? You lost a rook and captured the pawn on h4, so you can bring it back and probably repeat the position and claim a draw. But what if I go king f2? Maybe something like that, which allows you to win the exchange, maybe. But it's definitely not enough, and it doesn't compensate the rook. So no, not knight f3, and not, at least not now. You can exchange and then play knight f3, but then they just play queen g2. I can show you. And something like that fails. Well, they can take here, but the simplest is just to take on f3. So bringing the rook here makes a lot of sense. However, black played better. They played knight b3, attacking the queen. So if rook takes b3, this is a disaster. We are threatening this checkmate. By the way, what do you know how this mating pattern is called? Those of you who passed or who at least studied my course, Train Your Tactical Vision on Chessable, probably know. So checkmate with two rooks on the second or on the seventh rook. How is it called? Nobody knows. Well, it's let me type it here. It's blind swine mate. A very common mating pattern and helps in the endgames a lot. So here it's possible because the only way to get the king out is to move the rook, but every time the rook moves, it's queen f3. And something like that is very slow. So queen b1, the queen has to move. Knight d2, fork. So now it's extra rook because the bishop doesn't count. Queen e1, the second rook goes. Queen e6 is not a problem. There are no more checks, and checkmate is coming, and queen f3 in case if the f rook goes away. So after rook a2, white already resigned. But let me show you what could happen in case of this. This, queen f3, and it's over. If not a rook move, then rook h2, rook a to g2, checkmate. Was there anything else that could potentially save the game? No, because this rook cannot move to leave the f1 square available for the king, and there is nothing that can stop this checkmate. So this is how black won the game. And mainly because white was too greedy capturing this pawn. They didn't realize that the bishop on h6 becomes out of the place of action, and the bishop on d4 becomes extremely helpful and can help white to invade the enemy camp and attack through the lights, through the dark squares, as well as liquidate this knight and put the knight on d4, which would become better than any minor piece in this position. Fine. Let's continue. The next example is taken from the game between Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov. Kasparov was playing with Kasparov was playing with black pieces. So actually his position isn't good. Black is very close to equality, but white still dominates. This is a weakness. And in the end game, most likely white wins it. So what do you think? Is this a famous game? Okay, I don't remember. Let me check. Yes, it's from their match. It's a famous game. The match which was played in 1985. So what would you suggest for black in this position? So probably 95 is a threat. Okay, yeah, of course it's not obvious. Take your time. Okay, so John suggests to play bishop c6. Well, John, if you play this move, it's queen e5. The queen is under attack, so the queen moves. Just h3, maybe you can play this move. Well, white seems to be slightly better. They can they control these squares. But yes, bishop c6 is one of the solutions. Garry Kasparov played better. So what other move? Can we go knight d5 right now? Well, we lose a7 then. Maybe in this position. So queen e5, queen e7. Oh, here knight d5. Okay, here it probably makes more sense, but well, let's say they play this, and after they exchange, there will be isolated pawn on d5, and you can lose it. f6. Well, f6 right now, knight c5, and d6 is a weakness too. Maybe bishop c6, queen e5, queen e7. h3 and f6 here, but well, still e6 is a problem. So I can just play this move. What else I have? Maybe queen c5. If you take, my knight is there, and b7 and d6 are both white's targets. So Gary Kasparov, a6. Oh, okay, a6 is suggested by Peter. This is not what Gary Kasparov played. Well, this knight becomes vulnerable. So if I play this, it seems that this is the only move. Then you just lose on a6, like that. So he played bishop a4 to gain a temper. What now? If the rook moves away, queen d4, and there is an isolated pawn on d4 and knight d5 blocks, as well as bishop c6 helps. That's why they decided to exchange the queens. In case of b3, for example, the game would continue with this, and this time, because of no discovered attacks, bishop c6 is completely fine. So queen d8, rook d8, rook d8, rook d8, and knight c5. And the pawn is lost because there is no way to defend it. So bishop c6, still knight b7. How to play? Obviously, rook d2. So the pawn is sacrificed in order to have some initiative. Well, they played b3 with a temper and at the same time saving the pawn on b2. Well, b4 is the second option. Rook b2. And now what? If, for example, a3 is bishop c6, and after knight b7, the pawns become bishop f3, g takes f3, these pawns become weak, and it's basically the same idea that happened in the game, so I'm going to explain it. If, let's say, knight d3 in this position, which makes sense too, then it's a repetition, and again, a3 is forced, and something similar we are going to discuss. Something similar happened in the game, and we are going to discuss it. So b3, bishop c6, knight takes, bishop takes f3, g takes f3. White won the pawn, but black has a compensation. They have active rook, which forces white to defend their pawns. Because if black wins the pawn, black gonna have advantage. Their pieces are more active. So, how would you play in this position? Okay, so there is a suggestion of playing knight d5. Anything else? King f8, bringing the king. Well, bringing the king makes sense. Not sure if this is the move that you should play right away, but it's definitely a helpful move. Rook b2 behind the pawns. Well, still possible, but looks like this knight is not doing much. Improving the knight is the key. So many of you may consider a knight d5. Like, for example, at least Shahrat and John suggested this move. Well, then a3. You can invade with your knight there, but what's the purpose? And if you, let's say, play this move, then it's knight c5 with a temper, and after this, it's b4. So your knight is not where it should be. It seems that the knight is in the center, but it doesn't have any squares available. And it seems that you have to remaneuver. Maybe you can still draw the game, but it's much better if you improve your knight right away with knight d7. Why there? Because from there, the knight goes here. Yeah, the knight wants to be on e5. And if f4, that stops knight e5, then the knight goes to e4, so knight f6. with a pressure on the pawn on f2. Let's say knight c5, rook c2, b4, and knight g4, double attacking, and the rook f1, then rook a2. If, let's say, knight d3, you can just repeat the position. Okay, after b4, if you do knight g4 and he does knight d3 in this position, still rook d2 and the pawn is lost. Okay, why not to play f3 here? How to defend these pawns then? If you play e4, you lose there. If you play this move, you lose on a2. So king g2 was played, letting knight e5 move. But before playing knight e5, there is a very important prophylaxis that we should play. Which prophylaxis? This is a very common move for the endgames, especially when you have when white has such a pawn structure. f2 and f3 doubled. Who can tell me which move I'm talking about? f5? No, Shahrat, it's not f5. Brian is absolutely correct. It's g5. Why? Because it stops f4, so you don't let your opponent grab space then. If he does it, his pawns are isolated and weak. So g5, b4, while they are trying to improve their queen side, knight goes to b6 with a threat of doing this double attack. Oh, well, knight e5 still makes sense, but knight b6 this time looks stronger because knight d5 is a double threat. King f1 and still knight d7. Now, knight d5 didn't make sense, but this is still a problem. If king e1, we play this move, attacking there, a3, let's say, and knight e5, threatening with this. Well, and f3 is also hanging. So if you decide to defend the d3 square with a rook d1 move, you just lose on f3. What happened in the game? So king g2, and they just repeated the position and agreed to a draw. So for example, well, let me show you. Here they agreed to a draw already, but what about a4 move? Knight e5. Now what? Knight d3 is a serious threat. King e1 is a blunder. King g1 or king g1 or g2 maybe. Knight d3, double attack. g1, knight f3 just. That's it. So the game ended in a draw in this position because of a repetition. Either the king goes there on g2 or stays on f1. So it's the knight coming to e5 or d5 through b6 in case if the king is on g2. So based on his rook activity and his rook and knight coordination, Gary was able to threaten enemy pawns and tie white pieces to the protection of these pawns. So they cannot, they didn't get any chance to play for a win then. So here, in order to defend the position, which was originally slightly worse for black, he decided to sacrifice but activate his rook and tie the white pieces to defending his pawns. Well, playing for a win at the very end, I don't think so. Even if you win a pawn, it's really hard. Okay, so well, this is where we typically start our simul, but not today. Today I decided to stop. To stop doing this idea because it looks like it didn't cause much interest last time. So that's why, again, I want to remind you that if you like my webinars and you have such an opportunity, you can donate them using this button. So this is the link. It works easily. You just click donate, enter the amount you want to donate, and click PayPal. after which you can enter your PayPal account. So it redirects you to PayPal. You enter your email, click continue. So you see it's in Spanish because I'm reaching it from Argentina. And then money is delivered automatically to my account. So I appreciate your help. It helps me to prepare the content better. Okay, so let's continue. So it's not the end, it's just a reminder about the donation possibility. Then let's continue, and we have one more game to analyze, which we typically leave for playing, but this time I would like to analyze it. So this is King's Indian. So I know that some of you play this opening. That's why I ask if you have any ideas of what black should be doing here. There was an exchange of the e pawn for the c pawn, and black played c5. So what do you think? What do you think black should do? Well, okay, let me just, for those who don't play it, let me briefly tell you what's going on. In King's Indian, black allows white to get more space, but at the same time initiates the attack on the king side, while white plays on the king side. Okay, black initiates the attack on the king side, while white tries to play on the queen side and invade the enemy camp. So here, guys, you think that knight g3 is a good move, but I actually don't understand the purpose. So I take, you take, I take with a knight. Where is a win? You can play bishop f5 if you want, but f4. Or you can play with queen h4, right? After which I can continue with what? Queen e1, let's say. And after bishop f5, I can still do f4. So I don't understand the purpose of knight sacrifice. Knight e5 makes more sense. But knight e5, can they play f4 then, where your knight goes back there? So knight e5, f4, you cannot reach g4, you have to go back. But then don't they capture on h5? And after that, it seems that h4 is vulnerable. This knight isn't very well placed, of course, but it seems that white is going to improve it. Okay, so looks like all your suggestions are wrong this time. Do you have anything else to suggest? Brian suggests f5. Well, f5 is a very common move for King's Indian. Okay, there is another suggestion of g5. Well, in my opinion, g5 this time makes more sense, but g5, this is vulnerable. When f4, it's knight takes f4, so bishop takes. Well, it still should be okay, I think. Moreover, after bishop takes, there is a check. Knight f2, g takes. So yeah, looks like f4 doesn't work for white, and g5 makes a lot of sense. But g3 then, preparing this move, because then the knight is hanging, and if you take, h takes. Still f4 is a problem. f5 looks good. f5 looks good, it's very common. Maybe f4 then to still capture, but you can take there, and then bishop h5, g takes h5, queen h5. So I can hardly evaluate this position, but well, knight f6, then queen h4. So no, not that. e4 is hanging. Well, it seems that you have to play it. Queen h4 and knight g4. The queens are exchanged, and maybe something like that. This. No, this is a blunder because knight e3, bishop e3, or rook e3, bishop d4. Okay, so yeah, I think it's fine. Knight f6 is fine. So queen h4 and knight g4, maybe. Yeah, okay, I don't need to sacrifice the exchange. Here I can play this move, and if you take, I take with a knight. So it's not bad. It's approximately equal. It's hard to evaluate, but f5 deserves attention. I agree. Well, it was Judith Polgar with black pieces playing against Boris Spassky. And well, we are talking about material sacrifices. So she sacrificed uh, a pawn by playing bishop d4. Maybe not the best move according to the engine, but one of the best moves, definitely. It's in top 3. Um, what's the purpose of this move? Here, black realized that this bishop on e3 plays a very important role. It controls a lot of dark squares that black want to attack and invade, like f4, like g5 with the queen. So that's why she considered that exchanging this bishop provides her with a positional advantage, which can be enough to compensate the pawn loss. So Boris accepted. Well, here, despite of the extra pawn, I don't really see a good plan. So they definitely need to get the knight to the game. Well, if knight f2, knight f4, right? So threatening a checkmate. Well, g4 and passant. Yeah, how to defend? Actually, knight f2 is not playable. So they played rook a d1. Now, if knight f2, f4, I mean, it's definitely playable, but now they can play g3 to defend the position. Knight e2 winning the queen, but there is a knight here, so it's not winning the queen. And exchanging this knight for the bishop is a bad idea, because the bishop doesn't do anything, so it has only a few squares. So knight e5 is a possible move here, because after f4, well, f4 is not a threat at all. Well, also b5 is interesting, but b5 is another pawn sacrifice, so you cannot if you sacrifice one pawn, probably you don't want to sacrifice the other one, because if you don't have enough compensation and if you don't gain the pawn back, then you can be in a trouble. After knight f4, yeah, you are threatening with this move, right? But g3 saves. Well, f5 was played. Why f5? To be able to activate the rook. E takes f5. Knight f4. g3 is the only move. So such moves like that do not work because of a fork. So queen f2 also fails. It's even a checkmate. So g3, knight f4, g3 has to be played, but it's hanging with a queen. That's why simply rook f5, bishop d3. What do you think you should do in this position as black? Okay, so I'm waiting for your suggestions, and after that, I'll tell you what I have in mind here. So knight e5 here in this exact position doesn't make much sense. They just take here. So f3 is not hanging. Bishop takes, and queen f4. So probably you cannot include knight h3 move. Okay, so knight e5 here fails. H takes g3, knight takes g3. So how does it work? Yeah, the f4 knight is no longer under attack, but the rook is. So knight h3, king h1 even this time. Okay, what other suggestions? If we go knight f5 and they go f4, can't we capture with the other knight and then play bishop h3? Wait, in which moment? If we go knight e5 here and they play f4, no, not here, f5, it takes. If we go knight e5, okay, so no, I didn't get the point where to play knight e5. So g3, this, maybe in this position. If you play knight e5, they do that. We take with the bishop, but we lose on f4, so it fails. Can't mean in the last position where the capture of the e-pawn didn't happen. So knight here. And if they play f4, no, well, knight here works. It does make sense. I agree with you. So here, maybe queen d2, and you still have to play f4. But then they play g3, and it seems that there will be either a repeat. No, the knight is hanging, so you have to take on e2 and exchange, which is not a good idea because simplifying the position means that you may get to the endgame without a pawn. So bishop h3, well, now the knight is hanging, so you have to take, they take with a queen, let's say, you go there, and rook f2 just. Maybe even f4 works. No, it doesn't make sense. Okay, and so f5, this, how to play here. So knight h3, king g2, rook f4 attacking the queen, but well, what's the purpose? The queen moves, or to e3, for example, or maybe even knight e4 to gain a tempo, because this is potentially hanging too. I'm actually not 100% sure because there is a discovered attack, but I don't see how to exploit it. So, for example, if the queen moves, then it's g takes f4. King h3 doesn't work because of this. And this is a deadly attack. So knight g2 was played, and then Judith Polgar evaluated her position properly. She decided that actually black is not better, and what black has to do is to draw the game. King g1, and she repeated. You may ask me why the king doesn't go there. Who can actually answer this question? Why doesn't the king go there? The pawn on d5 is 3 times attacked. True. But the rook is hanging too, so you cannot take with the rook. Well, here, the best move, I think, is to take and then play knight e5. So rook takes, knight e5. What does it threaten? So you threaten to take, and to take on f3 as well. And if rook e3, you have knight g4 at the very least. That's why this is already a better position for black, because if the rook moves away, it's rook f3 or knight f3. So probably this is a must, but then knight d3 is a check, queen takes, and queen escapes. This is where black is better, because there is no full compensation for the exchange, just one pawn. So that's why king f2 is not playable, and Boris Spassky had to agree to it. He played this move and agreed, and then it would be threefold repetition. Uh, okay, fine. So is everything okay with the sound? And taking on g3 doesn't make sense here. So what's the purpose? They can even take with a knight or a pawn. Just in both cases, it's fine. Okay, so so the game ended. So let's repeat what we learned and then talk about the homework. So the first game illustrated us that in order to save the game, instead of keeping your pieces passive and letting them protect your weaknesses, you may try to overtake initiative or at least activate your pieces by sacrificing these pawns which are weak. So for example, here by sacrificing the pawn on c6, black was able to get the control over the d file and have some initiative. If white made a few more mistakes, they could even lose, but they played almost their best and the game ended in a draw. The second game illustrated that you can turn enemy pieces off the game by means of a sacrifice. If your opponent is too greedy, well, you can, instead of exchange, you can, for example, force their pieces to stay out of the place of action, but you can use your pieces like doing bishop d4, bishop c3, like that. Well, if your opponent isn't greedy and takes on f6, which is definitely the best option, at least you solve the problem with knight g4, because if in this position you just waste time, they play knight g4 and you have to take. Then f takes g4 and they have f6, they have knight h6 attacking here. This is a serious problem. They can also bring the queen to b2, trying to invade your camp, and together with knight h6 threat, it could be a problem. So at least with h6, by means of a pawn sacrifice, you could either make the position equal with some chances to play through the a file, or force them to take and then use your extra piece on the other side of the board. Here, a pawn sacrifice for activity allowed Garry Kasparov to save the endgame. Well, he lost on b7 because he could hardly defend it. And instead of passively defend it, he decided to activate his pieces because he thought that after that, his rook is strong enough to tie enemy pieces down to the defense of his pawns. Because if white sacrifices a pawn, then black will be better. So then he also found a way of how to coordinate these two pieces, the knight and the rook together. And this example. So a very important move, bishop d4. Well, it's actually hard to find this move even for me, because it's not so obvious that the dark squares are so important as one extra pawn. But what Judith noticed there is that after bishop takes c takes d4, queen d4, white doesn't have an immediate win. They do not have a plan of how to invade the enemy camp, how to convert their extra pawn, but black really gets some chances. And at the very least, they can draw the game by doing a repetition like that. That's it. So what's your homework? Let me show you here. Yeah, we are going to explore these two games. White is threatening with rook f8 in the first position, and in the second, you should find the best move for white. So actually, I'm going to send this file for you, just a sec, here. There also will be an email tomorrow. I'll send an email. So here, well, rook f8 is coming and it's hard to defend, but it's still possible to save the game. So I want you to find a way of how to save the game. There is no need to win, just draw the game by any means that you want. It can be almost anything, but let's keep this position for the next time. We are going to observe it in the beginning of the next webinar, um, because it covers a very important idea of material sacrifice in order to save the game, because of Black ability to be able to do something specific which guarantees a draw. So, well, King h7. King h7 here doesn't make much sense, right? Let's talk about this move. King h7, then bishop d6. So the rook has to move where? If c6. Oh, well, wait. First of all, there is this. Well, bishop h7 right away. I mean, king h7 right away means I actually don't know. Maybe bishop c1 and then g5 trying to open the position. Actually, king h7 also deserves attention, but there is a better way to play. And the second position that I would like you to do, so here in the game, black is completely winning. Absolutely winning with no chances, 2 extra pawns. However, white plays this move, which is good. And black could play at least knight e6, then king there, and then try to advance the pawns. That would be a winning plan. But instead, they play this move. So your homework is to find how white should react in order to not lose the game. That's all for today. Do you have any specific questions? So we are not going to play the games because I think it's actually, no, well, last experience showed me that it's just a waste of time. Well, maybe we will just conduct simul's in the nearest future without, I mean, instead of doing a webinar, we can do a simul, not sure when. The next webinar will be next Sunday, same time. I will announce a course which starts the next day on Monday. The course starts on the Monday, the 2nd of December. So let me see if I can share this page. Okay, so just a sec, let me find it. Okay, so now I can share the screen. So I'm going to announce it on Monday or Tuesday. We are almost done. So the payment gate is completed. So we start on December the 2nd. These are group lessons for players from 12 to 1500 on chess.com. Well, but even if you are 1000, you can still get enrolled, and it's affordable. So it's affordable. It's less than $10 per lesson. So 2 lessons a week, each 1 hour and a half, different topics. So you can look the topics for topics there. Well, actually, I can share the link, but I don't think that you can already start paying. I mean, So when the lessons start? The lessons start on Mondays and Fridays in the evening at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So not sure if it works for everyone. Of course not, because there are people from Asia. For those, it will be a late time. But if you can participate in live sessions, it will be great. If not, at the very least, you get the recordings and the homework, so you can still watch them, and you can still watch them and still take advantage of having this course. What if you go once a week? Well, if you have time to watch the recording of the second lesson, that would be great. Then yes, you can get this course. However, Peter, it seems to me that you are strong enough. Maybe, of course, you are missing some basics, and you can take advantage of this course too, but you are over than 1500. So, well, the course is recommended for everyone under 1700, but it's mainly I mainly focus on problems that chess players from 12 to 1500 face with. So yeah, well, if you miss a lesson, you get the recording, but please do it. Watch it and at least try to do the puzzles that I'm going to send after. Okay, fine. So we are done for today. Do you have any specific questions? If not, then I hope to see everyone next Sunday, same time. Well, I will announce the topic of the webinar on Wednesday, and on Monday or Tuesday, I will send you an announcement. I will send you the announcement of this course. Okay, will the course work if we cannot participate live? If you can then watch the recording and at least do some homework and send me the answers, yes, it will. But well, the only disadvantage of not participating in live is that you cannot ask questions during the session. If you want me to answer some of your specific questions, you have to send them by email, and I will cover them in the beginning of the next class. Yeah, by the way, there will be a World Chess Championship starting tomorrow, so that will be interesting. And actually, maybe this is what we are going to devote our next webinar to. We are going to observe the first games of the match between Gukesh and Dingliren. Fine. Thank you for joining, and see everyone next Sunday. And of course, and then I hope on Monday when I do these group lessons. Okay. See you. Bye bye.